we're going to cover different economic systems, and specifically the 5 most common economic systems, which are feudalism, mercantilism, capitalism, socialism, and communism. Now we're going to define each of these in this course, and it's really important that we base our understanding on the definitions given, because sometimes we kind of confuse different economic systems, and it's important to really have those groundwork of what they are and what they are not. So let's talk feudalism. So feudalism is a system where the king is established on top, and the king determines everything. The king might set up nobles and grants land to nobles, and these nobles then hire peasants and protect those peasants, all in the notion that the king is the one who derives the economic activity. The king is the one who answers these questions of what to produce, how to produce, determines who are the ones producing. The king and the queen are in charge of the nobles and the peasants. That's a feudalistic system. And for centuries, the world was under a feudalism, and we didn't see a lot of economic growth. And the example of William Hill coming to the Queen with the stocking frame is an example of why economic growth doesn't happen, is because those peasants or those individuals who try to innovate, they're not the ones that are going to benefit or profit from such innovations. As a result, there's no incentive to do so. And so we see some remnants of feudalistic mindset today. Well, let's go back to the 20s. The automobile industry came around, and there was a lot of opposition to moving away from horse-drawn carriages to motorized carriages. And part of that is the uncertainty, the chaos it might create as a result. But today we look back and we say that's just silly. What the automobile provided for us was so much better. But those in power were really nervous about what this would do to all those workers in the horse industry. Today we're seeing similar things with the autonomous car. Many people are pushing back against the autonomous car because of all the people that are employed in the trucking industry. And that's another thing to think about. Some of these feudalistic mindsets is we oppose innovation because it's going to disrupt the political power or disrupt the lifestyles that we lead. And they will. And that's very clear. Creative destruction is a part of this process. And so it is a challenge to think, should we adopt all these or should we not? The second economic system is mercantilism. Mercantilism is similar to feudalism, except in this case, the king or queen or the government grants monopoly rights to produce specific goods. And so they grant charters, is the terminology we see throughout history, which gives a specific company the right to trade a good. And so the downside with monopolies is there's higher prices to consumers and there's reduced quantities. But the upside is it produces profits for producers. And so there creates large incentives to take risk. And so in so doing, we see a lot of innovation and we see a lot of things happen when there are monopolies involved. So we see mercantilism, we see now the desire or the incentive to explore, to establish trade routes, the establishment of nation states, money, banks, insurance, all these things were brought about through mercantilism. We start to see innovation happen because of mercantilism. And the goal of mercantilism is to increase a nation's store of gold and silver and to maintain domestic employment. And so in this, it's a joint venture between the king and as well as the merchants to determine what to produce, how to produce. So the king grants these charters, but within these charters, it's open to each merchant of how they might answer the important economic questions. Next is capitalism. So capitalism is an economic system based on private property and the market. And it's the market that's going to answer the basic economic questions. Adam Smith argued that private interest and passions of men are led in a direction which is most agreeable to the interest of the whole society. When we talk about self-interest, it's not just that it'll make individuals better off, but Adam Smith argued that self-interest will make society better off. And so we talk about the important economic questions. What should we produce? How should it be produced? Who should produce it? How do we allocate consumers? The market determines these. Individuals make these decisions. So if you feel like you can produce a good and make money on it, then you are free to do so. And then it's the price that allocates these goods. And that's capitalism. The next step comes to socialism. And it was Karl Marx that argued that these follow in this order, in a sense, an evolution of economic societies. Because he argued that within capitalism, you'll have those who own the capital, the owners of the factories, and the workers. And that'll create a distinct two classes. And so it's socialism that'll bring these classes together. Because socialism, and here's how we're going to define it, it's actually quite important, is an economic system where the incentive system of capitalism remains in place, but the society owns the means of production. So what do we mean by the society? Well, it could be a small exclusive group, like workers of a factory, or it could be a more inclusive group, like citizens of a community. In fact, when we look at the founding of Utah, socialism was very much a part of the founding of Utah. ZCMI is it was a store that was set up in a socialistic society. Is all the different owners of shops came together, and it became the community that bought and sold the share, or that bought the shares of ownership in ZCMI. So it was the community of individuals in Utah that owned ZCMI. That's the socialistic part, is the community owned and operated this company. Now, if there's profits, it's those people who have ownership, the community members, that benefit from that. But the company still operates in free markets. There's still prices, there's still competitions. And so it's a social democracy, oftentimes we call this, where it's socialism, community ownership, but free markets still exist. And this is where one of the readings we encourage everybody to read is what's called The Economy. It's put in this context for specific reasons, but it was a talk given by Brigham Young, who was at the time the governor of Utah, to the individuals of Utah about why they should purchase shares in ZCMI and how income inequality was a great threat to the community. And so he set up these socialistic societies to address inequality of wealth and to address poverty in Utah. There's other examples of socialism today. So when a company gives their employees stock options, so you work for a company and they give you a stock, that means you have an ownership in the company. That's socialism. We talk about community-owned businesses. In Cedar City, they have the city-owned aquatic center. That's socialism. The community comes together and owns that. And now it still operates in a free market. You still have to pay money to go to the aquatic center, even if you live in the community. And so it's still operating with competing against other forms of entertainment, but it's a community-owned business. Karl Marx argued that the next step in evolution after socialism is communism. And so communism is an economic system where the three economic questions are primarily addressed by the government actions and not market forces. So what should be produced? The government decides that. Who should be produced it? The government decides it. Now we talk about government, it's important to think here is this government is different than feudalism. This government is a collective whole of all the individuals. That it's not just small societies, but it's the entire society together that owns and operates these things. And so as a result, there's no need for private property because all the people, the government, owns the land and factories. And it's the collective group of people, the government, that determines what to produce. And so we don't need money because we don't need to buy goods because goods are given out according to their needs. And so this famous symbol of the USSR, the hammer and the sickle, the hammer represents the working class, the sickle represents the peasantry. As this is the focus, is that it brings all these individuals together. And so communism is government owned. When we think of examples of communism today, K through 12 education in the United States is a form of communism, that the government owns the public schools. And you don't have to pay to go to them. They're not in competitive markets. And as a result, everybody gets free access to public education K through 12. That's an example of communism. And so these are the different economic systems. And it's important with each of these systems to think about how are the important economic questions answered.